a West Daytonian. That's first through and through. I'm a political strategist. I'm an environmentalist, future farmer, but most importantly, tonight, I am your facilitator. So welcome to Ohio Voices Informing Energy Choices. And tonight, y'all, this is another time where we come together and have another community conversation, but it is centered on the youth. So I'm just really going to jump right into the intro because I am so excited because talking to these young folks a couple of days ago really got me inspired. So let's get on into it. Again, this is Ohio Voices Informing Energy Choices, and we're talking to young people in Ohio who are subject experts about our energy choices. This is powered by Black environmental leaders and CommEN strategies. So thank you so much for holding space for us this evening. And really, y'all, let's just get right onto it. So this conversation that we're having is really a conversation around the real impacts of climate change in Ohio and the world at large. But most importantly, it's about solutions, and it's about a bill that we currently have at the Ohio State House called the Energy, Jobs, and Justice Act. It's a comprehensive bill that really centers equity, economic development, transparency, and accountability. And it is currently in the Public Utilities Council or committee in the House. And I really wanted to emphasize that because when we talk about issues, we often want to talk about solutions. But today we're going to be talking to subject experts around environmental justice. And I do not use that word loosely when I am talking about young folks who are really coming together to talk about what this means. And the reason being is because they put in their money where their mouth is, y'all. These are people young folks who get up and they work out their passion through making sure that we're creating a safe place for us to live on the earth while honoring the earth at the same time, but also addressing the sociological issues that exist or that are interconnected with environmental justice. So enough with me talking. I want to turn over the panel to our young folks to be able to introduce themselves. And I will first start with Kenia. Just introduce yourself, what you're wearing, a description, your passions, your identity in the city that you rep in, because we always got to say that.
Hey y'all, my name is Kenia. I use she, her pronouns. Right now I am wearing some beaded, like some yellowish, orangish beaded earrings, a rainbow scarf, and a black shirt. And I currently work at the Princeton Center for Information Technology Policy and the Ida B. Wells Just Data Lab. And I am originally I grew up in Solon, Ohio, but I also used to live in Cleveland and like Bedford, and I still live in Bedford. But right now I live in New Jersey. But I got a shout out to my Ohio folks. Love y'all.
Thank you so much. And one quick thing, what is your definition of environmental justice, like your personal definition?
Yeah, so for me, environmental justice is the fight to create a world in which communities who have historically been overburdened by the impacts of climate degradation just are well. Like, I think that's really like as simple as it can be. Like, I think everyone deserves to be healthy. Everyone deserves to like have access to safe food and water and breathing. And so, yeah, I think environmental justice is just the creation of that world.
Say the creation of that world where we all can be well. I love that. Okay, thank you so much for that, Kenia. And next we're going to move on to Anna. So name, pronouns, description of what you're wearing, and your personal definition of environmental justice.
Hi, everyone. My name is Anna Shanai. I use she, her pronouns. Today I'm wearing just like a green sweatshirt. And I'm coming from Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm a junior in high school. And my personal definition of environmental justice would be finding solutions and taking action against climate change in collaboration with Indigenous and minority communities. So making sure that all people, people whose land that we live on, people who, for the large majority of this country's past, voices have been oppressed, making sure that we're all on the same platform, we're all working together to conserve nature and to really protect our planet.
No, thank you so much for that. That was such a powerful definition. And it reminds me that Black and brown folks and indigenous folks are not new to making sure that we pay reverence to the earth is actually very ancestrally linked to who we are. So Anna, thank you for bringing that up and introducing yourself. And next, we have Deja. Go ahead, Deja.
Hello, so my name is Deja Meekins. My pronouns are she, her. I'm wearing a sweatshirt that I got from a scholarship the other day. I'm from Akron, Ohio, and I'm a team lead for the ACE Akron Early College team here in Akron, Ohio. And my definition of environmental justice would be the idea that all people and all communities, especially underprivileged and minority communities, that they all should have equal environmental protection under the law. And that the communities that are, you know, already disparaged kind of have just as much of an opportunity to, say, get over a natural disaster, because that is a result of global warming, for example. Those communities don't have that opportunity to overcome that type of experience as quickly as other communities. And it's harder for them to do that. So I feel like all people in communities should have equal environmental protection under law. That's kind of what comes to mind when I hear environmental justice.
Thank you so much, Deja. Oh, that was so good when you was like, it's the time that we have when we need those resources to be present, they're not there. And thank you so much for talking about accountability and policy, because that's why we are here tonight, is to tackle those issues and make sure our issues are represented in those spaces. Next, we have Kwame. Welcome, Kwame, to the panel. We are so excited to have you here today. And we are doing introductions, so just your name, pronoun, city where you're from, a description of what you're wearing and how you identify yourself if you would like that, and your personal definition of environmental justice.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to join you all this evening. Sorry, I'm a few minutes late. My name is Kwame Botchway. My pronouns are him, his, he, and I represent a group called Global Shapers, which is a young professionals group. Today I'm wearing a neat turtleneck, and I think it's hand knit, and I love things that are handmade because they are often more sustainable than the mass-produced stuff. So my definition of environmental justice is that I think there is the very clear recognition that there's a lot of people, just as a consequence of their color or race or socioeconomic background, have been disproportionately impacted by decisions that have been made, policy that has been made to, from everything from how, landfills and some environmental hazardous plants or factory or some other thing is situated. And so when I think of environmental justice, I think of policy or action or decision that does not inadvertently or unintentionally or intentionally impact a community or a demographic or a people just because of their socioeconomic or their demographic or racial background or identity. And one of the examples that I give these days is that sometimes when I think of environmental justice these days, there's a lot of conversation that is happening around the deployment of electric vehicles and electric charging and all of these things. And we are thinking about how can we enter into a more green future. I always ask people the question, like, we know that there's a lot of communities that have not yet taken advantage of these things. Are we thinking about how we can equitably deploy these things? So 20 years from now, 30 years from now, would not be having the conversation about green technologies and saying the whole community has been left behind. So I think the environmental justice is not just reactive. I think it needs to be proactive as well. So that's where I come to this conversation from.
Well, I can't wait to learn more about your perspective, because I think it's wonderful, because I also think environmental justice needs to be proactive, because I've been around the policy block a couple of times, and now things that we thought were good 10, 20 years ago, we're figuring out as we gather more research and as we have more conversations like this, that is absolutely not the case. And last, but very much so not least, is Samara. Hey, Samara, welcome. Name, where you're from, pronouns, identifiers of what you're wearing, and personal definition of environmental justice.
Hi guys, thanks for having me. I'm Samara Vines. I'm from Akron, Ohio. I am one of the co-leads and kind of the person who put in place ACE Akron, which is a branch of ACE. I have AirPods in and I have a necklace. I already said my pronouns are she, her. And I think environmental justice, to me, I'd say the biggest thing when I think of is just transparency and communication, because I feel like in marginalized communities, environmental justice or anything about climate change, anything in the environment is not well taught, if taught at all. So I feel like decision making, policies, laws, things to be transparent with the people of that community, even just little things to kind of make them more aware of what's happening in their community. Because I know a lot of people in Ohio, there's a lot of issues that, me even reading for the first time, like Power Clean Futures Ohio, I was just introduced to that. And I know in high school, we aren't really being taught anything about how to help the environment and being taught transparency at that, especially with our local officials. So I think environmental justice is just education and trying to, move forward along with the process of how the world is continuing to develop.
Thank you. Thank you. I love that it's actually education, and we're actually going to talk a lot about that because we talked about in our previous conversation how important that was. But before we go to that topic, what I would love to talk about with y'all, and this is popcorn style, so unmute yourselves as you see fit to talk, is why environmental justice and social justice are so intertwined. I know on your personal definition of environmental justice, we kind of talked about why these things are so important. But what I really want us to gear the conversation toward is, with the current state of Earth right now and those who inhabit Earth, why must we have that intersectional conversation about social justice and environmental justice, especially within our communities?
So I can start. So I think, to put it in the most simple way, any issue that impacts the environment by default impacts the people who live there as well. So I guess let's take natural disasters, for example, since I previously mentioned that. So when some people or communities have access to certain resources to help relieve those sorts of impacts on their community, while others don't, that's when it becomes a social justice issue. Because some people have access to certain resources to help them overcome certain issues, or like natural disasters or certain events, and others don't. And that would disproportionately affect this community because they don't have those resources. They may not have the knowledge of these sorts of things. And on top of that, low-income communities already have unfavorable health conditions at a disproportionate rate. They're more exposed to environmental hazards at a disproportionate rate. So I think we should have this sort of intersectional conversation, because whenever something impacts the environment, it impacts the people in that community. It impacts the people who live there. So like I said, going back to what I said before, like when certain communities have access to certain things to help themselves, and other communities don't, it's like, that's where it becomes a social justice issue.
Absolutely. Would anybody else like to piggyback?
Yeah,
I can
go for it, Simone.
I'm sorry. Are you sure? I can piggyback right off of Deja, because the whole time she was speaking, I was thinking, it is about the community and about the people that live there. And I think social justice issues and environmental justice issues, to be very transparent with you, are not big issues on the board of agenda when it comes to official government officials, local officials. So I feel like it is really, intertwined, because, when you live in a community that you're not educated about certain issues, it tends to fall in those marginalized communities. And, being from a community with a lot of minorities, we really aren't taught about a lot of climate issues, and we were highly taught, or we're barely taught about social justice issues. So I feel like those two, moving forward, we need to kind of incorporate those together, because knowing about what's happening around you in the community that you're in helps, and it helps us move forward as a whole, especially when it comes to two issues that aren't talked about really in politics, or, not positively, or haven't made any positive, strides to a positive, plan for, the green plan, or for, social issues. So.
Go ahead, Kenia, and thank you, Samara.
Yeah, thank you so much, Samara and Deja. Both of those were so, I don't know, it's hard to follow y'all. But what I was going to say specifically to Deja, the phrase that you kept saying, it reminded me of this quote by this activist named Bronte Velez, who says, "Whatever happens to the earth happens to Black people." And I think about that so often because it's like the same system that created the place in which Black people cannot breathe because police have their knees on our necks. It's the same exact system that created the, factories that make it so that Black people can't breathe because the air quality sucks. And so like, there's so much interconnectedness there, and you really cannot have environmental justice without a social justice lens. I think if you try to have environmentalism without thinking about social justice, I think that's really just like, I don't know, green capitalism. And like, if you think about that, then that's just like, if you think about environmentalism without thinking about the way that it impacts different communities, then you're just going to create like the same kinds of violences, but with like a green, you're going to create the same kinds of violent systems, except they'll recycle. Like they'll still create violence against Black folks, violence against Indigenous folks, but like maybe they'll drive a green car. So I think you really cannot have one without the other. And it's super important, obviously, because like we're seeing more and more climate reports that like we're running out of time these communities have been saying this for years and years. Like, so it's not that those conversations have never been there. Hopefully people are actually starting to listen now.
Yes, absolutely amazing. And what a way to round out what both Samara and Deja said. Anna, Kwame, please let me know if y'all would like to contribute, because I want to hear what y'all have to say now.
I'd like to chime in. I think Deja and Kenia could not have said it any better. I think they've, very eloquently explained what the connection is. And I think I really love the quote that Kenia just gave. I think it is absolutely true that the system, the policies, the historical actions and inactions that underwrite social injustice, as we know it, the policies that have caused some communities to, lack the investment in parks and green space, for instance, or the, policies that led to the situation of, hazardous waste treatment plants, the policies that cause airways to be placed above certain like communities and not the others. Those are the same policies that led to the housing discrimination as we know it. Those are the same policies that are causing the lead poisoning in communities of color as we know it. And so you cannot talk about environmental justice without talking about social justice, because it's the same equation, it's the same variables that play. A couple of days ago, I was in a conversation when I was telling people that take the redlining map of the city of Cleveland, for instance. And for those who are not familiar with what redlining is, it was a policy by the federal government, I think in the 1940s, thereabout, where they color-coded different neighborhoods, depending on who lived in them. So majority Black neighborhoods were color-coded red. And if you lived in those neighborhoods, you were denied access to mortgages and funds and financing for housing, compared to neighborhoods that are coded green. So you look at neighborhoods like Bata, you look at neighborhoods like East Cleveland, and some of these other neighborhoods in Cleveland, especially. And you see that you take those maps today, you look at the asthma rates. If you do a mapping for asthma rates or diabetes, or some of these other indicators, talk about like lack of access to digital broadband. If you take each one of these maps and you overlay it on the 1934 map that was drawn for the Homeowners Loan Corporation, you will see that the neighborhoods that are most impacted by infant mortality, by lead poisoning, by all of these other issues, is exactly the same as the redlining maps that we have from 1934. So what you begin to see very clearly is that the legacies of what we call redlining is still very much alive with us. And so you can't talk about these issues of environmental justice without talking about the policies that have created neighborhoods that have been disinvested historically. And so the conversation about remedies, for some of these issues, we need to go back and do what I call redesign the red line. So there needs to be, as much as there was intentional policy to create this problem, I think there needs to be intentional policy to correct them. And so I feel like that's what I'm interested in seeing elected officials do. Think very critically about what were the policies of the past that created the problems that we have today, and begin to think about equitable policy making that is participatory, like centering and uplifting the voices of community and the voices of youth, and making sure that they are correcting some of these things. So I could not agree more with Kenia. I could not agree more with Deja on the point that they made.
Yes, I love that. And as a person who's been involved in policy, I want to add another layer, because it's to tell the truth. In order for us to correct policy, we have to tell the truth about the history that led to the decisions of the policy. Because oftentimes when we're talking about lead in our soil, when we're talking about these red line homes and how there are different comorbidities, such as high blood pressure, asthma, different things like that, because of the air quality, because of the quality of the homes that we live in, it's really important for us to tell the truth. I think that's the beginning. A lot of people talk and say that budgets are moral documents, policies also are moral documents, because we have to tell the truth about where our beginning point is. And then many times when we're talking about environmental justice or social justice, we don't want to begin by telling the truth. And so that's why accountability and transparency is so important, because we, the people who are most affected, we know our history, right? And we can line that up very perfectly with the policy and say, hey, this puzzle piece doesn't fit for what we need. And that's why equity and environmental justice must come. So I just felt the need to say that. Anna, you're going to be the last person to talk about this, and then we're going to move on to the next question, if you like.
Okay, great. I just want to say I totally agree with everything that Deja, Samara, Kenia, and Kwame have said, especially what Kwame said about the redlining. I think it's really important that we acknowledge that, our country's history and how we treated people, that still has an effect today. Because I think one thing that frustrates me the most is that when people say, it's not, it's, Black people or, people of color, like they live that way because, they didn't work hard or they didn't do this. And I'm like, no, there's straight facts. It's because of this country's racist history. They had to live a certain way, and that has affected their generational wealth. That's why it's affected their education, their health, really everything. So, you can't blame Black people. You have to blame the system. And it's really hard, I think, when people still today don't acknowledge that, when there's such hard proof and hard evidence. And just to add on to what everyone else is saying, I just wanted to reiterate the fact that, everyone is affected by climate change, but not all people are affected equally. So you have people like Indigenous and colored communities that are affected more. And something, again, that I find really hard to understand is that people who contribute the least to harm the planet often face the harshest consequences of climate change. So the people who are living respectively of the earth, they're trying to do everything they can to be sustainable and protect our planet. They often face the consequences. And that's really not fair. It should be the other way around. If you do the most to harm the planet, you should deal with your own consequences. But obviously that doesn't always happen. And also, just to bring one more perspective, I know that also living, all of us in America, we also, I think, have a little bit of this like out of sight, out of mind mindset, where we don't see a lot of the things that are happening in third world countries and developing countries. And one example that I always like to think of is like the fast fashion industry. So the people who are creating so much of the fast fashion industry, that whole labor force is pretty much built of women who in Black and brown communities. So it's really hard. You can't really talk about environmental justice without social justice, because these women and really girls working in factories that's affecting their education. They're not going to school. They're also having horrible effects on their health. So we really have to talk about them when we're talking about environmental justice.
Thank you so much for that global perspective. Also, I think oftentimes in America we miss that completely. Like, and it's not. It often is a double-edged sword because we don't even have the language to understand how we are being oppressed through the lens of climate change and what happens when we ignore it. So thank you so much for that. And that actually leads to my next question. So how many of y'all are in high school right now? Just raise your hand. I know sometimes I look like I'm in high school depending on the camera angle and how much oil I got on my face, but I'm actually not. And the reason why I say that is because in our previous conversation that we had, y'all, so many of y'all talked about the fact that there must be accessible forms of education when we were talking about anything with climate change, anything particularly with environmental education. As folks who have recently matriculated through a collegiate system, I believe Kenia, because you graduated last year, and also current students who are in there. Why is that so important at this critical time in your life as young folks to learn and have the language around environmental education? And how could that change your lives when you have exposure to that information?
I can go first with that question. I think education, especially in the climate world, is the most important thing to me, especially because us young people, I just registered to vote. I'm going to be voting in July. I know many of my peers are old enough to vote. If I know a candidate on the ballot is, going for climate change, going hard for it, I'm going to vote for them. And if you're not educated on, little steps to even prevent certain things, unplugging your recycling, unplugging your outlets, if you don't know what candidate, especially when voting at 18 even, like if you don't know what your candidate supports, if you don't know how climate change is affecting the world around you, it's going to be harder for you to make an ideal choice that brings a positive impact to the world. So I know, especially at the age of all throughout high school, but especially at the age of 18, I feel like people should become more aware about climate justices because you're starting to get out into the world and starting to branch off and develop new ideas, new concepts. And if you can kind of prevent what's happening in the world around you just by one simple task, and that being educated on it throughout high school, and I feel like that makes it easier for to kind of maneuver and make your own opinions and just to become more educated overall. And I think being a new adult, I know that learning a lot about the climate change and climate issues in Ohio have helped me form my own opinion on certain things and helped me kind of look for officials beyond, a political ideology, look for them beyond how their morals are, especially when it comes to the environment. And I think especially with our ACE and ACE Akron, we're kind of striving to teach younger people about that type of stuff. So I think just getting involved in those organizations can really help shape your own future and your own opinion as a young person.
I love that. Say shape your own opinion, and also being able to do the research that it takes to have an opinion, because that is so important when we're talking about the issues that affect us. And quite literally, this is all of our futures. What happens to the earth happens to us too, as Deja said. Would anybody else like to contribute?
Yeah, so I think environmental education is important because, for one, it can encourage healthy lifestyles. So going off of what Kwame said earlier about redlining and how the communities which are majority Black that were redlined also had many health conditions, and it was those same communities that had health conditions or had an overwhelming majority of health conditions compared to other communities. So obesity and depression are extremely high in our youth today, just to name a few examples. So environmental education emphasizes good nutrition, and it emphasizes spending time in nature more, getting in tune with nature, and spending time in nature has been proven to reduce stress. So I also think that environmental education helps us students understand how our decisions impact the environment, because I know a lot of people, at least in my grade or a lot of my peers, it's kind of like what you said, kind of like an out of sight, out of mind kind of thing. It's not directly affecting me now, so why do I have to worry about it? And especially when you see other people around you not caring about a particular issue, it's well, if no one else around me cares about it, it's what is my voice gonna matter in this situation? So I feel like it really helps students understand their decisions and their actions and how they affect the environment. And it also gives them the knowledge and the skills that are necessary to address these environmental issues, which are very complex. And it also gives us ways, it also informs us of ways that we can, take action to create a healthy environment.
Yeah, Deja, thank you so much for all of that. I really appreciated your point about how a lot of people's health, and especially young people's health, is affected by environmental education. And I've been thinking a lot about, and I know a lot of people within environmental spaces deal with, they call it like climate anxiety or climate grief, when you're dealing with so much about like how, I don't know, the world is going to be on fire in like 30 years or something. Like, one, you feel helpless. And two, like it stresses you out, and it makes you feel as though sometimes like the work that you're doing won't even matter. And so what I'm trying to say is I think it's important to have environmental education both in the classroom, but then also outside of the classroom, because I think people need to like both understand the facts and like how important it is to take like action on climate change. And also I think we need education about the work that people are doing to combat climate change. Like I think people need to be educated about the work that y'all are doing through ACES, and like the work that Kwame is doing through Global Shapers. And like, I think we need to not just like, I think it's so important for schools and legislators to like make sure that environmental education is happening in schools, but I think it's also important to like educate ourselves outside of schools. And I think social media and TikTok is a really wonderful space to actually to do that. Like, obviously there's a lot of misinformation online as well, but like I have learned so much about both the environment and also about environmental activists just by following them on like TikTok and Instagram. And I think that also gives us more agency around the kinds of environmental conversations that we're able to have when we can like talk to each other and educate each other like peer to peer. So
love it. And go ahead, Anna.
Yeah, I just want to say I totally agree with everything everyone's saying, especially about like taking political action. It's so important that people, don't just listen to what their parents say, that they actually inform themselves on their own decisions. And I think that something, I guess that's important to me about climate education is that we really start it young. Because I think that it feels weird to say this, but kids are just so much more like impressionable than adults. Like you have people, I guess you may be like my parents' age or my grandparents' age, and they're pretty much set in their ways. You don't really want to focus your time and energy trying to change their viewpoint, trying to change their perspective, because they're pretty much done. They've kind of decided how they're going to live their lives, and they're not, at least most people, it's just harder to change them. But if you introduce at a young age, especially for teenagers, tell them, this is where your food comes from. This is when you throw away your trash. This is where it goes. This is how your clothes are produced. I think they really, if they see those visuals and they kind of learn the facts and the severity of the climate crisis, it's going to empower them to take action. Because I think the large majority of kids my age, at least, when I'm like doing work with my environmental club at my school, everybody cares about like climate action or climate change, and they want to do something about it, but they don't have any resources. So a lot of people care about these issues, but they're inactive and they're isolated. So they don't really know what to do. They don't know how to take action. And that's why I think, like what Kenia was saying about TikTok and Instagram, it's really important to have easy, accessible ways that kids can get information and take action. So whether that's a link to like send an email, I know that ACE has done a lot of those where you send an email to your officials to declare climate change an emergency, or you just have to look at an Instagram account to learn about when the earth is going to start to catch on fire, something like that. But it's really important that I think we start these changes young and we go from like a throwaway mindset to a more sustainable mindset. So if we think we start that young, kids will grow up, and the focus should just be on the youth generation.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And y'all bring up so many things that just make me mad. This is why I love listening to young folks talk about environmental justice, because I really believe that the interconnectedness of the internet, self-education, but also the awareness of being on the internet so early in life and the ability to self-educate made y'all subject experts around environmental justice in ways that I think people like me are still catching up to, even though I've been an activist and a community organizer for years. So I just really wanted to say that because y'all really found holistic ways to have everyday conversations about environmental justice. And I want to tell y'all there are whole adults that struggle to say anything that y'all just said. And that actually really brings me to my next point. And Deja, thank you so much for bringing up the talk around somatics and returning to the earth and the body and understanding how physically being outside, touching the earth, being a part of it, having a hobby that includes being outside will really transform your life in a lot of ways. Now, that doesn't say that absolves different issues that may lead to comorbidities like obesity or like depression is happening in students and in young people. But what we really need to do is create a space where students and young people feel safe enough to develop hobbies outside, because a lot of our physical environments outside of our homes or maybe even inside our homes are not sustainable for that type of lifestyle. So I also wanted to bring that up too, because all these things are so important. And these are things that politicians can change. They can change where parks go at a local level. They can change what green spaces look like and what communities get prioritized in regard to that. And so with our next question, y'all, we really talked about the role of government and talked about climate change. And we also brought up the need for governments to declare climate change as an emergency. Why are these formal declarations so important at a state, a local, or federal level? And why do we need this today, right now, before the earth catches on fire, y'all?
I can kick it off. Oh, it looks like Deja wanted to say something. I'll let you go. I'll go after you, Deja.
Okay, so I guess I know that, well, hyperpartisanship, for example, has become extremely prominent in our political climate today. So people will see someone of their party, like a representative of their party, like a congressperson or something of that sort, talk about a particular issue, and then immediately they care about that issue. So I feel like even if they start out not caring or even not knowing about global warming or climate change or environmental justice or anything like that, I feel like if they see lawmakers and leaders in our country, they see them caring about that, then they're going to start even if they don't start caring about it, they're going to start acknowledging those issues because they know that they're there. And this isn't to say like, oh, well, this is the solution to everything. This is just going to make everyone care about it. But I feel like that's a good start because I feel like not that many people care about making a change, even though they acknowledge that it's there. And I feel like that's a big issue in both our political climate and, issues involving global warming or climate change. So I feel like it would be important for people to see that we're trying to make a change about this, because I feel like not that many people care about it because they either don't know how to or they don't care to because they don't see anyone else doing anything about it.
Thank you for that perspective. Go ahead, Kwame.
Yeah, thank you so much, Deja. So I want to start with, just giving an example. So we know that I think it was 1969 when the Cuyahoga River caught fire. Before then, we had nothing like the EPA. And what that meant was that corporations, the steel manufacturing corporations could do wherever they want. They could dump their waste wherever they want. They could treat the environment as they wish to. But following the Cuyahoga River catching fire, and the government decided that they were going to pass the Environmental Protection Act, which led to the forming of the EPA as we have it, we've seen that there's been some standards that have been set on how corporations can behave and how corporations can relate to nature. What this tells us is that, the world as we have it, corporations as we have it, a lot of times revolve around the axis of policy. So Congress whether at the federal level, whether it's the Ohio House, or even mayors at the municipal level have a lot of power to set the agenda for how the environment gets treated. What that tells us is that if these politicians make the
I know that he's in a public space right now. So while that's taking place, does anybody else want to kind of talk about why it's important that we get all levels of government on board with federal declarations for climate change?
I could go off of what Kwame and Deja said. I appreciate your guys' knowledge, and it kind of led me to my answer. I think climate change is just kind of I don't say it's like kind of like an inter-party game, just like Deja said. It might not be that big on the agenda, but once you get like your favorite political person to start talking about it, you get your local government, your state officials start talking about it, it becomes a bigger thing on the agenda. Like, to be quite transparent with you, I bet a lot of people didn't know about real issues of climate change until Bernie Sanders brought it up. That's when people started to actually pay attention. And it's kind of like you pay more attention when your government officials or somebody you kind of look up to or that makes decisions starts talking about it. And it's not really high on the agenda right now. So it's kind of being overseen with the list of things that's going on in the world right now. So I feel like it's important to declare even a local climate emergency or to kind of have events and get awareness out there, because the more people are aware of an issue happening, the more they'll learn and the more they'll start to be conscious of their actions. So I feel like with it being kind of in our community, at least, it's not high on the agenda at all. It's hardly ever talked about. So I feel like that kind of goes back to being educated on an issue and just kind of picking your political candidates so that that they'll make the right decision for you, because honestly, it's all about the future and the next generation. So I feel like starting now, selecting candidates that represent you best, represent, the earth, will provide better environmental justice. It's really going to help in the long run, because, things become bigger when people are talking about them. And if people aren't talking about them, the issue is going to stay where it's at. So I feel like more officials kind of bringing this up, like Kenia said, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram. With this becoming a bigger issue, more young people are starting to kind of hop on this, like becoming more aware about climate change, and it's all about the agenda. So I feel like our political leaders, state, local government, kind of need to push forward to make this a bigger issue than what it is, at least to meets the eye, so that it can be more aware, and awareness is what drives change.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate you talking about awareness and bringing it back up. Kwame, I really wanted to give you a chance to complete your thoughts around why we need more formal declarations at all levels of government around climate change.
No, thank you. What I just experienced is part of what we would call digital redlining. So I was in transit on my way back from work, and then I stopped to take this call. So my line just cut off, so I had to step out and figure it out. But thank you. So the point I was making was that politicians, elected officials, and governments have a lot of power to make a whole lot of difference. If we can just find and garner the political will to be able to do that. And I feel like when we have more elected officials and we have more governments making declarations and setting the pace for how they want corporations to act, set the pace for what they want to see in the community, set the pace for how they want solar adoption. Like, for instance, to happen if a municipal government decides that, okay, we are going to make a declaration that we want to hit the target for solar energy adoption in our community at this certain time, I feel like corporations would respond to that, because what that means is that there's going to be demand, and we know that we live, like, whether we don't like it, but we live in a very capitalistic economy, and so corporations and the business world responds to demand, and often political declarations to some of these things have the opportunity and the power to set that demand. So you would see, for instance, when the Biden and government made clean energy a priority, you saw from the Super Bowl last year that a lot of, like, majority of the advertisement in the Super Bowl was about electric vehicles. What that is telling you is that corporations are responding to that governmental declaration because they know that sooner or later policy is going to force them to act a certain way. So I think, like, these are extremely important which is why their engagement with politics, their engagement with policy, their engagement with politicians and elected officials is extremely important. And I feel like the more we are able to, pick up the phone and call them, the more we are able to attend our local city council meetings, the more we are able to put that pressure on elected officials to recognize that we live in a time of climate emergency and force them through the power of our terms to make the right policies and decisions for us. I feel like the more we'll be able to do better, in the long term and for the long term of, of our future.
Absolutely. I love it. Before I give my 2 cents, would anybody like to go?
Yeah, I'd love to go. I totally agree with what everyone's saying. I think that ever since joining ACE, I learned a lot about the political side of environmental action. And kind of before I came into high school, I was always that person who I didn't really want to talk about politics. It kind of intimidated me. I didn't really know, because I think, especially in the past few years, our country has become so polarized that once you learn what side someone on, you either love them or you hate them, and there's really not a lot of in between. But ever since working with ACE and learning about how much power political action has in the climate world, I think that it's really important. And I know that like having a formal declaration, like when you declare climate change an emergency, it's not just, spreading awareness with grassroots organization and youth groups. All of that is so important, but sometimes it's really hard for that to kind of materialize into real action. And I think that when you have political action, when you have a declaration for climate change emergency, that activates financial resources and that puts it higher up on the political agenda. And that's what we need. Like everyone has been saying, this is an extremely timely issue. And, I just think that when we have political action, it means that we're actually taking a step forward. We're not talking about it. We're not planning. It's going to happen. And I think even though when you meet with your officials, it's really good to like set dates and kind of have a timeline and make sure that things are happening. It's not just an idea anymore. It's a definitive action. So.
Amazing. And that was really the point I was going to bring up. Declarations, specifically at the local level, at the state level, are really important because it says where the current issue is and the things that we've done as a governing body up until that point are not enough. So we're allocating resources because, number one, this issue is complicated. So we have to hire subject experts. We have to hire people who've spent their lives figuring out how to do this, but we also have to be able to go to the people who are affected by this issue. And a lot of times, a lot of that is money. We need the money to be able to provide sustainability within our communities. And we also have to understand that sustainability has to have a lens of equity, because it is not just about giving resources to communities and making sure that everybody has the same resources. It's often a conversation about financial investment, because we have to do a little more in communities that look like ours to make sure that we're even starting at a place where certain climate issues can be addressed, because systematically, historically, and quite literally, there are still a number of barriers that we have. And even at the federal level, the reason why, and Celeste and I just came back from Washington, D.C., where a lot of the issues that we actually talked about on Monday, y'all, were actually kind of brought up as secondary issues. So I really just wanted to say I was really amazed by how y'all been taking up space, because literally it showed up on Capitol Hill while we were in briefings and meetings. And that was really important to round out this conversation and talk about that, because we have to be able to get the federal government's attention and make sure that we understand that climate change and things like that is an infrastructure issue, is an issue that we cannot live without. Like, we can't live without roads. We should not have to live without internet. We should not have to live without lights. We darn sure shouldn't have to live without clean energy. At this point in the game, we should not have a federal declaration, so we can start to be able to move money at a level that brings climate change and environmental issues up to the point of infrastructure issues, right? Because that is why we really need to have those conversations too, and to take the bipartisanship that Deja talked about out of it, right? Because when we have to start looking at it as also an infrastructure issue, because these are things we cannot live without. Like, I can't live without eating. neither can nobody on this call. We can't live without clean water, right? Nobody wants to go outside in a couple of years and have their lungs disintegrated due to the quality of the air. In the summertime, I live downwind of a waste plant. I don't want to know what certain things smell like in 92-degree weather in July, but I have to when I take out my dog or get in my car to go to the grocery store, right? Or I open my windows on a nice April day, but it was 55 degrees before. So it's just like when those things happen, these declarations are official acknowledgments, but also they allow us to move resources and money. So with that being said, we are actually going to transition into our last question. And Kenia, I really wanted you to start off with this question because you tore it down when you were talking about how we need to talk about creative forms of education. And so I really wanted you to really start off a conversation about how important is it that we talk about storytelling in climate education, and why is this creative type of education instrumental in making sure we tell our stories and how we shape policy?
Yeah, thank you so much. I love this question. And yeah, I want to start with this quotation by, I believe, Walida Imarisha. She likes to say, all organizing is science fiction. All organizing is speculative fiction. And so, and by saying that, I think she means that like when we are, you know, engaging in activism, we are literally creating or imagining a future that doesn't exist yet. Like by, you know, organizing together, we are collectively creating that future. And it's kind of like, you know, creating a fiction that we are engaging with. So for me, like I consider myself like a climate fiction writer, a speculative climate fiction writer. And so what that means is I like to think about stories that help me imagine what, you know, it's like you can't get to a future that you can't imagine. You can't create a future that you can't imagine. And thus, like, I think imagination and really being able to think about like, what is our community going to look like when we all have like green energy? Like, what could our community look like if we don't? And like, what could happen if climate change prevails? Like, how will we take care of ourselves if that happens as well? And I don't know, I mean, I know some of y'all are a lot younger, but when I was coming up, like I really enjoyed books like The Hunger Games. Like there was a big push for like YA kind of like dystopian fiction, this, that, and the third. But oftentimes those protagonists were mostly white, usually white women, sometimes white men. And so it was kind of envisioning this future in which I never saw my community. Basically, I was like, well, you're talking about these dystopian futures, but I don't see any Black people. So do Black people exist in your future? Like, I don't know. Like, I would like to imagine a future in which Black people are there, like, or in which Indigenous people are there, like this, that, and the third. And so I think it's important, and I appreciate, I don't know who dropped it in the chat. Oh yeah, thank you. Basically thinking about writers like Octavia Butler. I also want to uplift a book. It's called The Marrow Thieves by Cherie Demoline, who is a Métis Indigenous writer from Canada. And both of them are thinking about ways that like, they're writing about climate fiction in ways that are imagining diverse communities of people that like survive into the future. So it's not like some like lone white man, he's the last man on earth running around the desert. Like, no, it's like, how do we create futures in which we can take care of our elders, take care of our youth, and like collectively organize to make the future better? All that to say, I'm sure y'all can tell I'm very excited about climate fiction and climate writing and climate stories. A little plug, recently I got a piece of mine, it's called Deliverance, and it's about a Black trans girl and her family imagining a future in which like Lake Erie has kind of flooded and like thinking about how they're surviving this climate challenge. But anyway, I recently got that piece published in the Literary Cleveland magazine for their climate writing series. So if you have a chance, go check that out. But anyway, all this to say, I'm really excited about the prospects of climate fiction because, and to my former point, I think it provides another accessible space to talk about environmental education for people who may not, you know, understand all of like the facts and figures that government or climate scientists are thinking about. Like, you know, whether or not you understand facts and fiction, like anyone can understand a story. And I think that's a really generative place to both inform people about the way that climate change exists, but then also to collectively imagine what our futures could look like once we defeat climate change. So, yeah.
That was wonderful. And I fully did call you the Octavia Butler of environmental justice, climate change, because I love it. And for everybody else, I think I probably may need to reshape the question slightly. And that is like, how have you used your story to talk about climate change or environmental justice, right? Because that's what Kenia is really, really talking about. It's like, how do you do that? Like, how do you tell your stories? Do you tell your stories, and how important is that when you're telling your story in the fight for climate change?
So going back to what I said earlier, well, sort of, but there's a lot of people in America who they have something called, cognitive dissonance. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it's like where they have two conflicting beliefs that and that results in their actions contradicting what they actually believe. So, for example, there are plenty of people, I know some, who claim that they care about climate change, but they aren't really doing anything to, like, they're not joining any sort of advocacy groups. They're not really trying to make a change. They're just saying that change exists, but they don't want to do anything about it. So I feel like storytelling can really almost expose that cognitive dissonance, because some people realize that they're doing it and some people don't realize that they're doing it. And I feel like telling those stories really kind of, especially personal stories, really kind of can get the attention of the listeners and sort of relate, have those stories become more relatable to the audience. And they can kind of take a step back and be like, huh, so this is a lot more important than I thought it would be. This is going to take a lot more work than I thought. So I think telling these stories can really persuade people to take action and persuade people to, take action, whether it be in their personal life or whether it be urging local leaders or federal leaders to implement policy to create a cleaner world, like Power Clean Future Ohio, the Energy Jobs and Justice Act, that sort of thing. So I feel like it can really encourage people to take action, whether on personal or local or even federal levels.
Just expose cognitive. It's like you just bring psychology, sociology, and environmental justice into one conversation for a stage. You like really do that. I really appreciate that, and thank you, because that is why storytelling is so important. Would anybody else like to talk about their stories?
Kind of going off what Kenia and Deja said, I really like the point about, not everybody can just read a book, can, just Google and read New York Times articles, read articles, watch MSNBC. That's not how everybody learns. And I feel like with ACE Akron, or at least, some parts of ACE, we try, we make videos, we like make Instagram posts, we make things kind of fun and interactive. Because I know when I'm teaching, we have people from ages 13 to 18 within our group. And I know, the 13-year-olds don't want to read a handout about climate change. They rather, activities, videos, fun things, things that kind of tailor to each person. And I know I'm the type of person who likes to read article and kind of get that, so, but I also like to hear things, like see things, like verbally, visually, like, Kenia, I'll definitely plug your article because, I feel like that's how certain people kind of learn, I guess. And I feel like it's very important to make videos, to share posts, to do designs, things that represent everyone, because not all young people learn all the same way. And I feel like, especially trying to reach young people, the way to do it is through storytelling, through writing fiction, making pictures, videos, TikToks. We, like, our generation kind of, I rather watch a TikTok video than read an article. So I feel like just those type of things do help overall, and it tailors to everybody, especially the younger crowd that we're trying to reach. So
Anyone else before we close out for the night? Alrighty. Oh, go ahead, Kwame.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I recently shared that I think we are all a sum total, like we are a sum of all our stories. And so I personally believe that if you believe strongly that you matter, then you should believe that your stories matter as well. And I think that the way to reach a lot of people, like storytelling, requires a lot of vulnerability. But the thing is, you cannot build connection without vulnerability. And we sometimes do this work feeling like just the statistics and the science and all of those things are enough to adequately let people understand the issues. But sometimes telling your personal story would have a lot more impact than just sharing statistics. And so you could tell somebody that, like, I'll give you an example. You could tell somebody that, like, Black people were 3 times as likely to die from COVID, for instance, than other demographics, and they would not necessarily relate to it. But if you begin to tell them about your personal loss as a result of this, they understand it better. So I was talking about climate impact, for instance, and I was explaining that, like, I'm originally from Ghana. Most of my family are farmers in the village. And so I made the example of, okay, well, we know that the weather is going to get really, like, there's going to be some variability in the weather pattern. We are not going to see, know when necessarily it's going to be rainy season or when it's going to be dry season. So crops are bound to fail and livelihoods are going to fail and children's school fees are not going to be paid and food is not going to be on the table. When I tell these stories sometimes, it makes a lot more sense for people and they're able to relate better than me just sharing statistics to them. So I think there's a really, really powerful influence that storytelling has in this advocacy that statistics and numbers alone are not going to be able to do. And so I believe strongly in that storytelling, and I agree with everything that everybody else has said. So the thing is, my closing remarks would be that you should always be courageous to tell your story authentically and rigorously and honestly, because that is where the real impact comes from.
Yes, I love that. I love that. And I just want to say I've been using my personal story and talking about my life. And a lot of times, because I wasn't as versed in climate change or environmental education, when I was talking about racial justice, when I was talking about gender justice, when I was talking about growing up very much so working class, I didn't realize that what I was really having a larger conversation about was my right to take up space, my right to live well, my right to have access to things that brought health and wealth into my life, and not wealth in a monetary sense, but the ability to not have lead poisoning at the age of 6, like I did, because I lived in a home with paint that had lead, right? And I was 6, and I was like, oh, tastes kind of sweet. Every time I run into the wall, it tastes kind of sweet, so I'm going to eat it. That's what 6-year-olds do, right? But that was an environmental justice conversation that I didn't realize I was having. But having the power to tell my story, sometimes your story comes full circle. And as you grow, and as you gain wisdom, and as you gain knowledge, and as you gain understanding, it helps you understand that sometimes, even by telling your story, you're telling people much more about who you are and what your needs are and your ability to take up space in ways that we could never imagine. So the one thing I want to tell y'all as the elder on this call is never stop telling your stories, never stop taking up space, and never stop being empowered. And as you learn more and as you grow more, make sure, like Kwame said, that you continue to tell your stories, because you would be surprised how much telling your story, even though it stays the same because we can't change where we come from or what has happened to us, but we'll be surprised as we grow how it takes up space and how it changes, and how we realize that our stories are really saying much more about who we are and the world that we want to see and the world that we were dare to live in. And we need that as dreamers, because as environmentalists, that's what we are, right? That's what Kenia said. As an environmentalist, you are a dreamer because it is desire to dare and dream about a world that does not exist yet, right? And so I just really wanted to end that and say thank you so much. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Deja. Thank you, Kenia. Thank you, Samia. I did not say your name, Samara. Thank you, Kwame, for being on the call and for letting us take up space today and having this conversation. And y'all really do. I don't know how often y'all hear this, but I will be the cliche adult in the room and tell y'all that y'all really do give me hope, because oftentimes I think because of the power and the wisdom that's stored in y'all voices, because it's stored in such young bodies, oftentimes the words that you say are not taken seriously. And I just wanted to say, like, y'all, like I said, y'all are inspirational. Like the things y'all were telling me about, adults are talking about on Capitol Hill, and need a little bit more education in at some points in time. So I just wanted to say, keep on doing what you're doing. And I'm so proud that y'all were able to find a life's passion so early in life, because had I found my passion so early in life, no telling where I would be. But this gives me hope, because the conversations that people like me started, it's so nice to see how it's been taken and how I can shut up and be an elder and listen at y'all feet, so I can go back out and take the expertise that I have and that I know and try to create the world that y'all tell us we should be living in, because I believe y'all when y'all talk. So thank you so much for that. And thank you for being here today. And thank you to our audience for listening. Again, this is Ohio Voices Informing Energy Choices. And today we talked to the real subject experts, y'all. We talked to the children who told us about cognitive dissonance in a conversation about environmental justice. So thank y'all so much. And oh my gosh, y'all impressed me so much just by being exactly who y'all were. So thank you for the jewels that y'all dropped on my soul today. Samia said, thank you. The ancestors are honored, y'all. And yeah, that is the end of our presentation. And thank you for being here. And we might take a second to not be live anymore. So we have to make sure that we are no longer live. And then if we can stay back for a couple minutes, because I have a couple of things I want to relay when we're